Varghese, an old student of our center, the then Center for Linguistics and English, who teaches now at Manipal University, who is going to speak on Deleuze, beyond philosophy, true philosophy. So we are all waiting to listen.
Thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to present this paper and also talk to you about the kind of mission I am here. As some of you might have got that flyers. I am actually going in different parts of the country meeting scholars, students, academics regarding a conference on Deleuze. We are organizing here in Manipal. Are organizing around between May 29th and June 7th. May 29th to June 2nd, we have something called a major international workshop, the Varghese K, which will be, the resource persons are going to be very top scholars in the field. And 5th to 7th, again, a gap of 2 days, 5th to 7th, then we have the Deleuze conference, which we are conducting in association with the journal Deleuze Studies. So this is going to be a very serious event, which I can promise. And this occasion I also take you to invite for that event. Just please go through the website. We have our website in the net. And I hope like some of you will be coming for that. So, as part of it, my paper is also something tuned up with that, since I'm inviting many of you, as I've mentioned in the abstract, this is an introductory analysis, not like something on a lot of areas in which Deleuze is relevant or Deleuze's scholarship is so much deep. I'm not taking any specialist aspect. I'm doing a very general introductory analysis. And that starts with what is philosophy and what is philosophy for Deleuze. He has written along with very wonderful book on philosophy, one of the last collaborative projects with these two great authors. But this had been something she had been thinking long back from the time of difference and repetition. So I'm just sort of summarizing it, simply putting it all together. And that's the first part. Second part will be more on what is philosophy as what we call the differential ontology. And I'm afraid that's a very huge area of which, though I ambitiously put it in the abstract like 2-3 aspects, then I understood that for the introductory analysis that will be too much. And so I will be focusing basically on Spinoza and a little of Bergson, as I put it, the trinity, which has gone in the making of a system, philosophical trinity, Spinoza, Bergson and Nietzsche. But if I take all these together, and a lot of other authors like Hume, or we can take other authors like outside philosophy, a lot of authors, countless, so I cannot do all that. So the more focus on the second part will be Spinoza, and what do you mean by one of the very important concepts, immanence? And how does he posit this immanence, especially his favorite attacks or favorite enemies, like Plato, Hegel, and Kant. How he pitches that attack. From there he moves through Spinoza and how he develops what properly we call the differential philosophy. So second part will be on that. And after that, again as I promised, the abstract will take a few areas like how this philosophy moves out. Out of philosophy, that's a through philosophy, beyond philosophy. So beyond philosophy, he moves out. That we'll take up for the discussion. And whatever little time, we'll try to concentrate. So what I'll do now is straight away I'll go and read the paper. And I don't know how long, maybe probably 45 minutes, 45, 50 minutes. And after that, we will take it up with each question. So paper is guides Deleuze beyond philosophy through philosophy. What we will examine in the first part of this paper is the novel concept of philosophy as developed by Deleuze and how it became a radical alternative to traditional philosophy, its alleged orthodoxies and redundant methods. In the second part, we will explore how Deleuze developed his new differential philosophy as an answer to the rigidities and constraints of traditional philosophy. A logical third part is also there, which is Deleuzean philosophy's relation with other systems of thought and discourses, which we will be mostly taken up as part of the discussion. We shall first examine Deleuze's concept of philosophy as developed in his purely independent work, Difference and Repetition, to be followed by an analysis of the same concept and related questions in his co-authored work with Guattari, What is Philosophy? Deleuze and Guattari have given us a complex philosophic system that has made a radical departure from the objective styles and methods of traditional philosophy marked by speculative reflection and ontological articulations to make it a revolutionary practice of creation. As Deleuze and Guattari assert, philosophy is no more communicative than it is contemplative or reflective. It is by nature creative or even revolutionary because it's always creating new concepts. In What is Philosophy, the two authors set out three conditions of the production of concepts, which is the quintessence of philosophy for them. The first one is the configuration of the image of thought, which they call the plane of immanence. It is on this plane of immanence that philosophical concepts are created. The second condition is the creation of what they call conceptual personae, who are the true agents of enunciation of philosophical concepts. Thirdly, the construction of concepts requires, as its means and raw materials, an inventory of other concepts to draw upon. An equally important aspect of philosophical creation is the relation with the non-philosophical, as Deleuze explains. Philosophy requires non-philosophical understanding just as much as it requires philosophical understanding. That's why philosophy has an essential relation to non-philosophers and addresses them too. They may even sometimes have a direct understanding of philosophy that doesn't depend on philosophical understanding. Style in philosophy strains towards three different parts: concepts or new ways of thinking, percepts or new ways of seeing and hearing, and affects or the ways of feeling. They are the philosophical trinity, philosophy as opera. Unquote. Philosophy as creation of concepts is the conclusion that is reached in the last collaborative work of Deleuze and Guattari, which is What is Philosophy. But this idea matured through the long career of both the authors, who experimented with many modes of philosophical enunciation, which in turn are marked by unconventional, interdisciplinary interrogations, forays, and collaborations. To repeat, the notion of philosophy as concept creation is the quintessential distillate that sedimented in the long course of their fabricating experimentations with doing philosophy in ultra-radical modes and forms. As two intellectual omnivores, they took almost every idea and discipline into the fold of their philosophical craft, and in this process struck up rhizomatic connections with domains and territories which traditional philosophy feared to tread. A range of dissimilar and divergent disciplines like military science and genetics to musicology and metallurgy were clinically examined and assiduously wrenched to extract their philosophical essence. Philosophy, in this sense, got transformed into a becoming philosophy of other disciplines, and at the same time becoming other of philosophy itself in a mutually complementary process at an indiscernible point. We get the first indications of the radical desire to cut down the traditional structures of philosophy and the formulation of a new differential system in Deleuze's early work, Difference and Repetition, especially the very important chapter, The Image of Thought. We make our initial exploration of the Deleuzean notion of philosophy by pitching on the counter thesis Deleuze poses against traditional philosophy in this important chapter. This critique will be followed by the discussion of Deleuze and Guattari's prescriptive formulation of how philosophy should be created in their work, What is Philosophy? Deleuze has claimed somewhere that the most important chapter of Difference and Repetition is the image of thought. Here, Deleuze makes a thorough review of early philosophy's major lacunas and gaps. Descartes and Kant are the two philosophers specifically targeted in his critical analysis. He calls their philosophy the philosophy of recognition and representation based upon a servile and unimaginative empiricism, against which he proposes a philosophy of encounter, sense, and transcendental empiricism. The flows of early philosophy derives from its premises on what is thought itself. Descartes, out of a benevolent universalism, thinks that the capacity for thought and good sense are equally distributed in the world. This in turn makes affinity to truth and good nature the principles of thought. Only good-natured and truth-prone souls have capacity for philosophic thinking. How does this Cartesian thinker function? Or to take things one degree ahead, for the Cartesian thinker, thinking is both an epistemological exercise as well as an existential state. I think, therefore I am. This rare fusion or monism is in turn articulated on what we call faculties and their harmonious functioning. The thinker to think an object first of all has to recognize it, and this is possible only when the abilities of divergent faculties are brought to focus on the object in an agreeable synthesis. As Descartes ponders over the famous piece of wax, it is of course the same wax which I see, which I touch, which I picture in imagination, in short, the same wax which I thought it to be from the start. Thinking for Descartes is a concordia facultatum, and therefore a common sense. This is the meaning of his cogito. Thought as common sense and recognition applies to Plato and Kant as well. This model is discernible in Plato's Theaetetus as well as in Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, along with Descartes' Meditations. Such an orientation is a hindrance to philosophy according to Deleuze. A philosophy based on common sense, naturally upright thought, and transcendental model of recognition has severe limits. Philosophy at the most becomes the average of opinions or doxa of a like-minded community. In other words, philosophy terms a sterile doxology in which doxa is elevated to the rational level. A more pernicious danger lurks here, which is the imposition of a specific value on the truth derived out of doxa. As Nietzsche observes in this context, truth may well seem to be a more modest being from which no disorder and nothing extraordinary is to be feared, a self-contented and happy creature which is continually assuring all the powers that be that no one needs to be the least concerned on its account, for it is, after all, only pure knowledge. Truth harms no one, neither thinkers nor anyone else. Perhaps in Kant we find the value-laden truth assuming more complicated shades once he gets tied up with this famous category of reason. For him, reason and truth prevail together so that the truth of knowledge, morality, reflection, and faith are supposed to correspond to the natural interests of reason and are never themselves called into question. But according to the law of recognition, the faculties can err, which has to be subjectively and transcendentally rectified. Illusion of senses may happen since various senses and domains of thought can encroach upon one another. But this does not prevent thought from having a good natural law at its base. As Deleuze observes of Kantian critique, critique has everything: a tribunal of justices of the peace, a registration room, a register, except the power of a new politics which would overturn the image of thought. Even the dead god and the fractured eye are no more than a passing bad moment, the speculative moment. They are resuscitated in a more integrated and certain form than ever, more sure of themselves, but with other practical and moral interest. Unquote. Traditional philosophy's world is thus a world of representation and recognition. It is also the world of the same as opposed to difference. The I think is the most general principle and the unity of all representation. The cogito becomes the transcendental apex, which subsumes the functioning of all other faculties and their actions alike. I conceive, I judge, I imagine, I remember, and I perceive. For Deleuze, on these branches of cogito, difference is crucified. On the other hand, philosophy is about encounter, so says Deleuze. What is encountered may be Socrates a temple or a demon. It is not just recognized or perceived, but sensed with the different affective tones like wonder, hatred, suffering, love, etc. In that sense, philosophy is about life itself and not about representation of life. Therefore, sensation is not a foot servant to higher faculties, but something which has an independent being for itself. It is not about a sensible being that philosophy is concerned, but about the very being of the sensible itself. It is not the given, but that by which the given is given. Unquote. It is not a quality, but a sign. From this perspective, the sensible is insensible or imperceptible in a way. Common sense denies its being and makes it parasitic on other faculties for a subservient existence. For Deleuze, sensibility should quit its role from the conditions of a joint labor with other faculties and be independent on its own. Once sensation is declared independent, other faculties also follow suit. Each faculty's capability should be intensified even to the point of dissolution. At this point, it falls prey to a triple violence: the violence which forces it to be exercised, of that which it is forced to grasp, and which it alone is able to grasp, and also that of the ungraspable. Each faculty discovers at this point its own unique intensity, or in other words, its own radical difference and differentials. This is what can be called transcendental empiricism or superior empiricism. Contrary to Kant's belief, it cannot be induced by the ordinary empirical forms under the determination of common sense. On the other hand, as we have seen, it results from the intensification of faculties at their own transcendental level, and from that point communicate to empirical reality. The question becomes, what activates this amplification and dissolution of faculties? The answer is pure intensity itself. Intensity is again pure difference, which is imperceptible in itself. It cannot be grasped in itself by an empirical sensibility. The latter can comprehend only its neutralized and covered up forms in terms of quality. On the other hand, it can be grasped in its immediacy only by the transcendental sensibility of a transcendental empiricism in unique encounters. Transcendental empiricism gives weightage to the intensification of senses and freedom. From this light, the problem of the philosopher is not good ideas or bad ideas, but what makes thinking itself possible. As Antonin Artaud said that, the problem for him was not to orientate thought or to perfect the expression of what he thought, but simply manage to think something. For him, this is a work indeed. It presupposes an impulse, an intensification, a compulsion to think, which passes through all sorts of bifurcations, spreading from body and nerves to the soul. Henceforth, thought is forced to confront its own collapse, fracture, and powerlessness. So thought is not prompted by innate ideas and natural good sense, but something to be artificially engendered and labored for. Innateness in thought has to be opposed by genitality, so argued Artaud. As he says, quote, I am innately genital. There are some fools who think themselves as beings, as innately being. I am he who, in order to be, must with this innateness. One who innately must be a being that is always dipping this sort of non-existent kennel, pictures of impossibility. Unquote. Thinking becomes something agonistic, and therefore philosophy has a different problem to address. Thinking is an intrinsic genesis and not an extrinsic conditioning. Therefore, truth is a matter of production and not habituation. It's a matter of genitality, not of innateness of Descartes or reminiscence of Plato. As genesis and development, thought is difference itself. It is metamorphosis. To ground thought means to metamorphose it. The first thing that is metamorphosed is truth itself, which becomes sense. So philosophy is no more concerned with truth and error, but with sense and nonsense. Sense is what is expressed by a proposition, but what is this expressed? It cannot be reduced to the object designated or the relieved state of the subject. We must distinguish sense and signification here. Signification refers only to concepts and the manner in which they relate to the objects conditioned by a given field of representation. On the other hand, sense is developed in the sub-representative determinations. It is easier to say what sense is not than to say what it is. In effect, we cannot formulate a proposition and its essence and its sense simultaneously. The paradox is that we can never say what is the sense of what we say. In that sense, it can never be captured in the empirical net but only simplified through a transcendental operation. Structuralism perhaps is the best example. At the empirical level, the constituents might not have any meaning, but they produce a transcendental sense once brought together in specific sets of opposition. For example, the sentence, Bujam is a snark or blituri might not have a meaning, but it has sense, perhaps the sense of a nonsense. As Deleuze observes, so many authors like Flaubert, Louis Carroll recognize the value of nonsense. For them, the mechanism of nonsense is the highest finality of sense, just as the mechanism of stupidity is the highest finality of thought. The critique made in the chapter of the image of thought in difference and repetition had long time to wait till Deleuze and Guattari supplemented its searing attack on dogmatic philosophy with a constructivist paradigm for the creation of philosophy. This occurred with their last collaborative work, What is Philosophy? They proposed this paradigm by making the embodied assertion that philosophy means creation of concepts. We shall now turn to this peculiar assertion and its implication for philosophy briefly. The philosopher is the friend of concepts. He is the potentiality of the concept. This means philosophy is not a simple art of fabrication or invention, but one of creation. Since the concept has to be created, it refers back to the philosopher as the one who has it potentially. Creation is not the prerogative of philosophy alone. Science and arts also create their own respective objects, but the creation of concepts is the exclusive privilege of philosophy. There are no ready-made concepts already waiting to be retrieved from the limbo of philosophy. They must be invented and created and would be nothing without their creator's signature on them. Nietzsche was right when he said that philosophers must no longer accept concepts as gifts, but must make and create their own. They must distrust the concepts not created by them. What is the structure of a concept? There are no simple concepts. And also, there is no concept with only one component. Every concept has multiple components and is a multiplicity. Every concept has an irregular contour defined by the sum of its components, which in turn cut and cross-cut each other. Concept is a whole because it totalizes its components, but at the same time, it's a fragmentary whole too. Perhaps the best example is the Cartesian cogito itself that deals with the question of the self. This concept has three components: doubting, thinking, and being. The complete statement of the concept read as, I think, therefore I am, or more specifically, myself who doubts, I think I am a thinking thing. The concept condenses at the point I, which traverses through all the components and which the three I's, that is, the doubting I, the thinking I, and the being I, coincide. As intensive ordinates, these components are ordered around a zone of indiscernibility that occasions their passage from one to the other and also maintains their inseparability. The first zone is between doubting and thinking. Myself who doubts, I cannot doubt that I think. The second zone is between thinking and being. In order to think, it is necessary to be. The components are presented here as verbs, which is not a necessary rule, only that there should be variations, or more specifically, phases with variations of components. Here, doubt includes moments that are not species of a genus, but phases of a variation, perceptual, scientific, and obsessional. The same goes with modes of thought, feeling, imagination, and having ideas. The types of being, thing, and substance also fall with the same logic. Infinite being, finite thinking being, and extended being. In the concept of Descartes, the centrality goes to the second phase of variation, finite thinking being, or I am a thinking thing. This in a way keeps out other phases of the variation, but it only shows a tentative closure of the concept as a fragmentary totality, since the structure of the concept is also opens up the possibility of passing on to the other phases of being by bridges or crossroads. Such passage again leads to newer concept. Thus, among my ideas, I have the ideas of infinitism. so says Descartes, is the bridge leading from the concept of self to the concept of God. This new concept of God has given again three components, which are the proofs of the existence of God as infinite event. The third proof, or the ontological proof, tentatively guarantees the closure of the concept, but it throws out another bridge to the concept of the extended, which again assures the objective truth value of our other clear and distinct ideas. The concept is a matrix of coincidence, accumulation, and condensation of its components. The conceptual point constantly traverses its components, both rising and falling within them. The concept is never stationary, but a moving equilibrium of differentials. In this sense, each component is an intensive feature or an intensive ordinary that must not be understood as a general or particular, but as a singularity. Unlike science, there are neither constants nor variables in the concept. We do not pick out a variable species for a constant genus or a constant species for variable individuals. In the concept, there are only ordinate relationships and not relationships of comprehension or extension. The concept's components are neither constants nor variables, but only pure and simple variations, or ordered according to their neighborhood. They are processual and modular rather than constant and extended. For example, the concept of a bird is not derived out of its genus or species, but in the composition of its features like posture, color, singing, movements, etc. The bird is an assemblage of color, movement, and sound, becomes an event or exciting, and this is what is expressed in the philosophical concept. The concept is a heterogenesis, which means that its components are ordered according to zones of neighborhood. It's in a state of survey in relation to its components and endlessly traverses them according to an order without distance. It is immediately co-present in all its components, passing back and forth through them. Its refrain and opus with its number, chiffre. The concept is an incorporeal but gets incarnated and effectuated in bodies. It does not have spatio-temporal coordinates, which are the object of science, but only intensive ordinates that concord with the spirit of philosophy. It has only intensity, and in that sense, does not possess energy. It is anenergetic. The concept speaks the event in the spirit of philosophy and not the essence of the thing, that is the object of science. We should take a detour in the Stoic philosophy, which has great influence on Deleuze, and in its light try to understand philosophical concept as event in contradistinction to the state of affairs and functions of science. In the first series of the Logic of Sense, Deleuze explicates the concept of event by drawing upon the character of Alice in Louis Carroll's works. Deleuze argues that when we employ the verb to grow in the proposition, Alice grows, it becomes a paradoxical event. When we say Alice grows, we mean that she has become larger than she was in the past. But the same proposition also signifies that she is smaller than what she will become in the future. So the event of growth in the case of Alice cannot be precisely defined. It is becoming of both bigger and smaller at the same time. This paradox, which flouts any essentialist reduction, is an event, and it is in this sense that Deleuze defines philosophical concepts as events. On the other hand, science tries to capture the same event within a temporal frame like Alice smaller at T1, Alice bigger at T2, and so on. But the irony is that the attribution of temporal moments is ultimately dependent on the event of growing, in which Alice becomes bigger and smaller at the same time. This becoming and continuous variation of the concept makes it inexact, which is opposed to the exclusive disjunction and rigorousness of scientific functions. But the inexactitude is not something that results from error, limitation, or approximation. On the other hand, it is the exact passage of that which is underway. Concepts, therefore, are multiplicities whose ontology is becoming and variation rather than petrification and redundancy. The discussion we have already made regarding certain fundamental structures of Deleuzean philosophy makes it more than clear that this system makes a cardinal rupture with the dogmatic philosophy based on concepts like identity, unity, essence, categories, transcendental synthesis, etc. This break is justified by a groundbreaking critique and also supplemented by a possible paradigm for philosophical creation based on concepts. But we have not till now addressed the question of how Deleuze incorporated the spirit of this critique in his own works. The answer clearly is that he challenged traditional philosophy by creating a new philosophy of difference. This assertion of difference as a central motive and theme of Deleuzean philosophy raises more questions than giving answers. This is because difference itself is essentially a differential category. Differences are of many types, kinds, and shapes. So the question essentially becomes, what sort of difference is articulated in Deleuze's philosophy? This is a troubling question that can only be lengthily answered. The problem is that difference itself differs within the system of Deleuze, and therefore no content, form, or definition of difference can be abstracted out of the play of difference. So both difference and its conditions differ from themselves as the Deleuzean system develops. It's a Nietzschean dice play at its heart. There is no essential difference to be caught up in our conceptual net, but only the witnessing of an actualization of difference itself with variations in his philosophy. What we can at the most dare to track down is how he formulates the system of difference by using the ideas from a set of philosophers and thinkers, among whom the most important ones are Spinoza, Bergson, and Nietzsche. If we are going to discuss the role of these philosophers in this extremely complex system, that will take up much more time, so that I'll modestly attempt here as a brief discussion of the main philosophers against whom he upholds difference and how he takes up one major ally, Spinoza, in this effort. Deleuzean difference is a complex articulation for the sheer twistedness of the relation between being, determination, and difference. In this context, Deleuze reversed the traditional ontological problematic. For him, the problem is not how being can sustain its difference, on the other hand, how difference can sustain its being. Difference forms being and provides it with necessity and substantiality. Difference is the stuff of which being is made, but this difference is not one of degrees that is determined by external reality, but one of nature which is generated internally. It's an efficient difference, like the Aristotelian scholastic efficient causality. Again, it is a causa sui, tool that operates within the heart of being. Deleuze draws this notion of difference primarily from Bergson, which is further modified by the concepts drawn from Spinoza and Nietzsche in his larger philosophical system. The concept of difference in Deleuzean system is primarily worked out as a counter-thesis to mechanicism, Platonism, and Hegelianism. First, let us take the case of mechanicism. Mechanicists uphold an empirical notion of being and a concomitant concept of difference. For them, being is primary and difference is a mode of its determination. This determination is something made objectively, so that difference is one of degree established between being and its external reality. Deleuze poses a Bergsonian challenge to this concept of being and difference by postulating that being's essence is not determination, but indetermination. This position is taken by Deleuze since difference is not only internal, but something that cannot be conceived as simple determination also. A specific determination in the mechanicist version can be sustained only through something external, say a cause, an end, a chance, etc. So the external determination of being of the mechanicist becomes a subsistent exteriority, which is the result of an external factor or an external other. Deleuze opposes this objectively determined being by upholding a Bergsonian notion of being based on internal difference and indetermination. In other words, for Bergson Deleuze, being is based on substantial interiority instead of subsistent exteriority of the mechanicist. Plato, with his transcendental and teleological notions, becomes another important target of criticism of Deleuze. From the ontological point of view, Plato champions an external notion of difference. While difference is internal in Bergson and Deleuze, in Plato it is driven by a notion of finality. The ontological difference is created by the manner in which ideas are organized in the transcendent Platonic realm. It's a hierarchical one with the idea of good at the apex. The difference of anything, therefore, is accounted by its distance from the final destination of good. On the other hand, for Bergson and Deleuze, there is no such articulation of distance or hierarchy in the concept of being. A thing and its end, in fact, are one and the same. When difference has become the thing itself, there is no space to say that the difference is drawn from an end. Here, the efficient difference of Bergson and Deleuze is contrasted with the final difference of Plato. The final turn-off is that Plato's difference, which depends on a finality, cannot explain the substantiality and necessity of being, which in turn has an internal dynamic. Hegel is the third major adversary. Hegel perhaps becomes more important than others in the light of Deleuzean difference. For Bergson and Deleuze, difference is internal, while for mechanics in Plato it is external. Hegel falls on the latter's line and takes difference to the extreme point of contradiction. Hegel's philosophy is characterized by totality, teleology, and the dialectic of spirit and matter. Contradiction and negation are the linchpins of the movement of his teleological system. Contradiction triggers forth his totality in its dialectical progression. For him, contradiction becomes a positive concept. He observes in Science of Logic, quote, "Only when the manifold terms have been driven to the point of contradiction do they become active and lively towards one another, receiving in contradiction the negativity which is the indwelling pulsation of self-movement and spontaneous activity. More precisely, when the difference of reality is taken into account, it develops from difference into opposition and from this into contradiction, so that in the end, the sum total of all realities simply becomes absolute contradiction within itself. Ordinary thinking fails to recognize the positive side of contradiction, where it becomes absolute activity and absolute ground." Unquote. Contradiction, as we see here, in the same movement becomes the absolute ground and dynamics of reality. It occurs at a heightened point in which difference and opposition are pushed to the limit. If contradiction is a point of rupture that transforms the identity of events, then what dynamics drives reality to such a point? In other words, what form of contradiction constitutes the identity of reality in its lay beingness? Here there are two major options: opposition and difference. But Hegel falls for another category, negation. Negation simply says that the identity of everything is through an other. Everything exists through negating what it is not, and hence determination is negation through the other. Hegel draws this insight from Spinoza's dictum, omnis determinatio est negatio. The identity of one is the non-identity of the other, and pushed to the limit. Anything is what it is, not in the whole of reality. This negative determination is celebrated centrally in Hegel's system. It is an abstract argument, and anything can be drawn into its vortex. If things have identity through a simple negation, then this characteristic work in a more complex manner in the case of human beings, as they are endowed with consciousness. In the case of human subject, it is not a simple negation at work, but a double negation in a complex form. This double negation has two moments. At the first moment, it knows that the other simply negates it as another. But this negation needs to be negated again in a second move or moment to restore one's identity back to oneself. Therefore, the subject becomes the other of the other. This negation of negation is a sublation also as it develops infinitely. Looking closer, Hegel's notion of negation becomes empty, static, and circular. Nietzsche was acerbically critical of the Hegelian system. For Nietzsche, Hegel and Kant had high gift for amassing and conserving established value judgments, even if it's a question of overcoming the past. They were always enslaved to the negative. Negation as a concept in Hegel is a typical instance. One can understand a single negation as difference or distinction, but a negation of that negation to restore one's identity is senseless and self-defeating, since nothing changes with such a convoluted act. Affirmation through double negation is only a sophistical gimmick. For how could affirmation result from negation unless it conserved that which is denied? Affirmation thus produced is a ruse to say yes to that which is negated. It is the ideology of the slave, which at best is represented by Zarathustra's ass. Ass says yes to whatever pain inflicted on it and carries whatever burden put on it. Philosophically viewed, this is an affirmation of negation. As Deleuze, bitter critic of Hegel, points out, this ass, the ass, and dialectical ox leave a mortal aftertaste. They have a terrifying taste for responsibility, as though one could affirm only by expiating, as though it were necessary to pass through the misfortunes of rift and division in order to be able to say yes. It is as though difference were evil and already negative, so that it could produce affirmation only by expiation, that is, by assuming at once both the weight of that which is denied and the negation itself. Unquote. Deleuze's philosophy of difference becomes a counter-statement to the mechanical, empiricist and dialectical conception of difference as formulated by the mechanicists Plato and Hegel. Hegel seems to be the culmination of the other two positions. Deleuze, on the other hand, develops his philosophy by drawing from another set of philosophers, mainly Spinoza, Nietzsche and Bergson. Deleuze's system is a composite one, constituted of many planes, but these planes are not organized through a mechanical part-whole relationship. Each plane interacts with another, and both together generate a new plane. The new plane in turn emerges or melts with another having a new ontological character. The planes drawn from Spinoza, Bergson and Nietzsche evince a twisted relationship within the Deleuzean system. To quote Michael Hart in this context, quote, a particular and important aspect of Deleuze's evolution is that it does not involve exchanging one theoretical perspective for another, but rather it's a process of accumulation and constitution. In other words, each step, each new terrain of investigation is a construction that never abandons or negates, but rather reproposes the terms of its predecessor. Deleuze carries his baggage with him. Nietzschean ethics is Bergsonian ontology, transported to the field of value. Spinozan politics is Bergsonian ontology, and Nietzschean ethics transported to the field of practice. Ontology inheres in ethics, which in turn inheres in politics. Unquote. In the Deleuzean Plato, we cannot have a specific empirical separation between the planes of the above-mentioned philosophers. They meld together in complex logic. A historical or logical ordering of these planes often goes against the Deleuzean method and spirit. Nonetheless, these planes have to be constituted and explicated for a better understanding of the Deleuzean differential philosophy. We will analyze briefly the Spinozist plane within the Deleuzean system. The other planes of Bergson and Nietzsche are conveniently elided here, since they are too lengthy to be taken up here. Immanence and expression are the most important concepts incorporated from Spinoza, which directly enrich Deleuze's notion of being-being's relationship. The philosophy of difference, as it is evident, cannot be articulated on the concept of transcendence. Transcendence creates a fundamental cleavage between reality and the so-called metaphysical model behind its working. Outside reality and constituted in a privileged niche beyond or above it, transcendence always created structures of hierarchy and domination. This always stifled reality's functioning, distorted its representation, and misplaced the role of humans in it. Transcendence had many forms, from Plato to Sartre. The first one was the transcendence of forms as represented by Plato. The second one was the Christian God, especially as developed in the patristic literature and medieval theology. With Descartes, the third form of transcendence set in, accompanied by its intricate anthropocentrism. This was definitely a more complicated development as compared to the former ones, since it had an inbuilt dualism within it. With the concept of cogito, the human subjectivity and knowledge was clearly asserted by Descartes, but the guarantee of the apolitic nature of human knowledge was still retained by God. This is a dual transcendence of subjectivity from the world and of God from both subject and the world. In the due course of time, the first transcendence, that of God, was overcome by the second one. Human subject transcended the world and started giving it its due form on his, her own. From Kant to Sartre, we find the apotheosis of this new notion of human subjectivity. But ironically, this was only a simulacrum at its root. The human transcendence was only a derived version of the divine transcendence. Man was able to dislodge God to a great extent, but still there was no turn to immanence in opposition to transcendence. Definitely to Spinoza in the 17th century, following Duns Scotus in the Middle Ages, who built a strong philosophical system around the concept of immanence. Duns Scotus came out with a peculiar theory of immanence to resolve the relation between the attributes of nature and that of God. For elaborating the relationship between God and nature, he developed two categories, that's distinctio formalis and distinctio realis. What he meant was that within the infinite nature of God, what appears to be different in formal level is essentially indistinct at the real level of substance. In other words, the same attributes can have two expressions in the realm of form and in the realm of essence, but they are not of contradictory nature. Their essential unity within God is due to his infinite nature. As Antje Schmidt points out of Duns Scotus, the divine attributes are formally distinct, that is, they can be defined independently of one another. To God, however, they only obtain to the mode of infinity, and by virtue of this infinity are identical in God. This theory has influenced Spinoza in an important manner. The immanence developed by Spinoza under the influence of Duns Scotus came under the attack from both philosophers and theologians. He was condemned and excommunicated for his so-called heretical philosophic system. He becomes the Christ of philosophers for Deleuze. Transcendence requires two ontological substances, but one should be superior to the other, both in power and value. The forms, God, and the human subject are all superior to the worlds they create. In each case, the constitutive power is superior to the constituted world. But this relation is not one of invasion or occupation. A superior power is not colonizing an inferior and degraded reality. On the other hand, the former is complementing the latter by liberating its powers and potentials and making it more perfect. Transcendence does not corrupt, it completes. That's why it is a moral duty to seek forms, follow God, and emulate the humans as the highest form of finite being. For the opponents of transcendence like Spinoza, Nietzsche, and Deleuze, this apparent harmony and complementarity is built on an essentially deceptive logic. This is because the structure of reality and philosophy are different. For philosophy, there is only one universe, and it is the ontology of this single universe that is to be explained. But transcendence creates a bipartite system with two substances in it. If there are two substances, then they should interact and become one. Or if they remain as two, this will result in the formation of two universes. Transcendence always keeps its structure as two universes and two substances. This leads to the creation of another unhealthy hierarchy in terms of value. Once the substances are of two natures, one should be outside and ontologically superior to the other. This means that the position of one is beyond and at a superior level in relation to the other. Only the privileged clergy, metaphysicians, and scientists have access to its functioning. This will also lead to the creation of value and power hierarchies in terms of knowledge. Only that which submits to the identity of forms, or that follows the narrow dictates of God, or that which conforms to the conceptual categories of human thought, is admitted as acceptable. On the other hand, physicality, chaos, difference, and all that resist identity and subjection to form are denigrated. Spinoza took a radical turn in this context and formulated his alternate theory of immanence and expression premised on the universality of being. Univocal being means that the substance of being is one and indivisible. There exists no distinction like different substances, different layers or different levels of substance within being. All hierarchy and division are removed from being. Universality of being has three important moments in the history of philosophy, other than Deleuze, Duns Scotus, Spinoza, and Nietzsche. According to Deleuze, the second moment, Spinoza marks considerable progress over the conception of being compared to Duns Scotus, the subtle doctor, and the first one. Univocal being becomes identical with the universal, unique and infinite substance named Deus Ziva Naturam. against the Cartesian theory of substance, constituted with distinctions like the ontological, the formal and the numerical, substance, quality and quantity. Spinoza proposes an alternate model divided into substance, attributes and modes. Substance is the underlying reality, attributes its essence and modes the form of its concrete appearance in reality. An attribute of a mental substance is that it thinks. Its specific mode is thought. An attribute of physical substance is that it is extended. A particular body is its mode. God's attributes are omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, etc. They have no modes in the ordinary sense. God's substance is mode in another sense, which is creation or emanation. For Spinoza, the elite of atheism hierarchy, the all-great underlying reality was God himself. But he is not a transcendent reality as conceived by religion and theology. His essence is one with the created, while the creatures he has created are in turn phases of his essence. There is absolute unity in this process as two sides of the same coin. This is called the University of Being, which is the main theoretical prop behind immanence and expression. An important postulate of Deleuze's philosophy is also University of Being. It's a direct influence of Spinoza. As hinted above, the basic contention between Spinoza and the theologians was centered on the relation between creation and the creatures. The creation had two versions, as we have referred to above, creation as such and emanation. Creation in the Judeo-Christian version was something performed by God as a master fabricator, using materials that were brought in from outside by his will. Here the creator and the substance through which creation is made are different and hence also bear an equal value. The substance of creation is definitely inferior to the creator God. In the case of emanation, things are a bit different. In emanation, the substance for creation is not brought from outside, but forms part of God himself. Creatures emanate from his essence itself. This is more like the expressionism of Spinoza and Deleuze. But the similarity ends there. In the case of emanation also, there is hierarchy and value. Once the creatures emanate from God, they have a different ontological nature, distinct and inferior to God. So both creation and emanation were anchored in transcendence and disparity. In order to overcome this duality, Spinoza proposed the theory of expressionism. Expressionism is anchored on the notion of immanence and equality of beings and beings. There is no difference between the essential substance of being of God and its incarnation in beings or creatures. This definitely would lead to an inevitable crisis. If there is no difference in the substance of being God and its creatures' beings, there would be only a sterile unity which will in turn take the former, much truncated in power and status. How is this impasse overcome in Spinoza? Expression is the category through which this impasse is resolved. Substance is not a static category, and within its immanence, it is ceaselessly created. It is not a creation of things outside it or emanations different from it. Its creation is infinite expression within itself, deploying its twin properties of attributes and modes. Substance expresses itself in attributes. Attributes in turn express themselves in modes that are modifications of attributes. Attributes are active and dynamic forms that contribute to the ontological makeup of the substance. They are, on the other hand, active expressions of substance God. What do attributes attribute? Each attribute attributes an infinite essence and unlimited quality. There are a number of such unlimited qualities, but humans can know only two: thought and extension. Each unlimited quality is an essence of substance which is expressed through attribute. Attributes in turn express themselves as modes. Modes are modifications or modulations of attributes which assume a rhythmic character. A modulation is not something different from the producer, rather it is only an inflection. If modes are modulations of attributes, they are part of substance via attributes. Being substance remains univocal, though it is expressed first through attributes and then through modes. As Bergson summarizes, thus, quote, thus expression comprises two movements, one from substance to attribute, the other from attribute to mode. The first is qualitative expression, through which substance renders itself determinate in certain infinite forms. The second is quantitative expression, through which these forms express themselves in turn through the production of particular modes. Expression comprises both determination and differentiation, unquote. Todd May compares this coentanglement of substance, attributes, and modes to the Japanese paper art of origami. Origami is a folding of one single sheet of paper into different figures like man, turtle, swan, etc. In origami, there is no cutting of paper or introduction of any outside element. Everything happens as the expression of one piece of paper. The paper here becomes the substance, the extension of the paper, the attribute, and the different figures, the modes. If you can imagine the paper being able to fold and unfold itself, we come very close to being and its modal expressions. Like the Japanese origami, the reality of being is an instance of folding, unfolding, and refolding while remaining immanent within itself. Once translated into Deleuzean system, this immanent dynamics of substance in Spinoza becomes a play of difference in being. It is a self-caused play of difference that articulates being in Deleuze. Being is dynamic all through and at all levels. It is whitelist in its essential makeup. Peter Hallwood observes, quote, being is alive because it is living. Being is inventive because it is invention. Being is innovative because being innovates. Being is differentiated because being differentiates. Being and different are one and the same, unquote. Difference never found a respectable accommodation within the early philosophical system, let alone as the principal force behind the dynamics of being. It is only in the post-Nietzschean phase of deconstruction that it achieved a significant theoretical primacy. Deleuze becomes most modern in this regard as difference is made central pivot of his system. Difference was always rated as an inferior and even a monstrous category by the Greeks. It represented excess, chaos, and transgression in contradistinction to harmony, order, and objectivity of form. Finally, difference was restrained as a concept by the Greeks. Aristotle's specific difference becomes its quintessential tamed form. The latter concept hardly represents the unique singularities and innate dissonances of difference, but makes it a pliable and functional category for comparison and classification. In effect, the difference was deprived of its independence and creativity. It had to depend on another term for making sense or meaning in a function-like comparison. For example, it is only in relation to an abstract middle term, like being human, that the difference between two persons or two genders can be drawn. Different terms become different because they're different terms of an underlying nature, quality, or property, as Deleuze observes. Quote, difference appears only as a reflexive concept, as a concept of reflection. Difference testifies to full submission to all requirements of representation, which becomes thereby organic representation. In the concept of reflection, mediating and mediated difference is in effect fully subject to the identity of the concept, the opposition of predicates, the analogy of judgment, and the resemblance of perception. Unquote. In opposition to the Aristotelian Greek capitulation of difference under representation, Deleuze attempts its liberation from external mediation and a priori conceptual straitjacketing. Accordingly, Deleuze develops an absolute notion of difference that is self-subsistent and free to play any comparative function. There must be a differentiation of difference, and in itself, which is like a differentiator, a sick underschneide, by virtue of which the different is gathered all at once, rather than represented on condition of a prior resemblance, identity, analogy, or opposition. Again, every object, everything must see its own identity swallowed up in difference, each being no more than a difference between differences. Difference must be shown different. Unquote. Difference doesn't apply to anything other than itself. Being itself is different for Deleuze, and its world is a process of immanent and infinite self-differentiation. It's a scenario of everything dividing into itself. For Paul Patton, who indicates the Deleuzean position, difference is the fundamental term through which the identity of all phenomena should be understood. Difference never refers to a primary identity, but only further differences. Therefore, difference is a process before it's a category within the Deleuzean system. I shall stop it here, and before going further, I think
Any questions, comments?
So this is a clarification actually when you talked about Deleuze's critique of the traditional philosophy, which operates in the particular image of the thought, and that particular image of thought is the model of the recognition, which Kant had talked about in the transcendental synthesis of synthesis, and we talked about that how the experience operates in the model of the recognition. But we see that Kant himself comes out of this model of recognition in the third critique when he talked about the reflective judgment, when he talks about the sublime and the beauty, and where there is a free play between the imagination and the understanding. So, one question is that. And another question that we see the history of the philosophy, if we take apart from the Spinoza, Nietzsche, Bergson, that in the history of philosophy itself there is the creation of the new vocabulary. For example, Molle-Conti used the notion of the flesh, or Heidegger would use the notion of the design. So that themselves are not available in that subject-object or representation model, and they will create their own conceptual vocabulary in order to critique this model of the representation. So I just want that to.
Yeah. From the Kant question. The Kant, of course, like Kant's problem with Kant, and specifically is that he is already an apparatus, a thought system into which perhaps very schematized or formalized, to which reality should conform, already have category, and or minor epistemological process, or which you have something like reason, transcendental ideas like world, soul, God, like all this. Like. One of the very important critique raised against Kant, which inspired actually Deleuze also, is by Salomon Maimon. It's not very important now, but a very important critique raised on him. Is that the problem with Kant is the genetic connection between his various departments, a lot of departments. So, at what point, what we call the department of sensation or sensibility will communicate to the department of understanding? Or how one sense or one faculty can become related to another faculty, which definitely has a different sort of problem, number one. Number two is the whole problem is synthetic a priori, especially like numbers, how we use like now. The problem again is like at what point a synthetic a priori judgment, especially using that kind of like grounds, become operational. Or at what moment, what prompts me to count? I can count so many things. I may count your heads here, I may count my fingers. If you take Bergesian characters like Molloy and all, it counts nothing to do, Nui, they count specks of dust around. So, there is no rule genetically other than the formulas why one is prompted to think, one is prompted to count. Is there an ideal situation in which one should count? Can you have a rule of that? That is the problem with, and also transferring something like, from sense to understanding, what makes a genetic transformation? It should be, because the whole thing, that is the Kant's danger also. You completely epistemologized, took everything to the brain. Then at what center this brain? Completely epistemological, in epistemological operation. One point moves into the other. And finally reason and transcend something outside all that. And then something would be called noumen or like thing in itself. All of this becomes disjunctive. And he didn't have a very clearly genetic explanation. And that's where Salomon Maimon took on him. It's a brilliant attack. And he himself, Kant himself accepted that. This is too brilliant. And that is something which Deleuze also like take up. And of course, Maimon has a very different sort of explanation, where he comes with that. Let us not separate understanding and sense. There is an understanding in the sense, and in a way, there is what we call a sensible understanding, or there can be understanding also has a sense. These are only two levels, and then he moves into layers, where he says that there cannot be these separate departments. These departments are one, but only weak in its intensity. An understanding, a sensation may be a weak form of understanding, or understanding may be an intensified form of sensation. That is why we think while we are asleep. Sometimes we think, we dream, we do a lot of things like that. There is nothing called an ideal type of thinking. So these all can be different intensive expression of the same thing at different levels. So let us know, that is why, that again calculus comes in, Leibniz, let it be differentials. Because sensation itself cannot be an absolute zero. There cannot be, that's a contradiction. If you say that a sensation is an absolute zero, then sensation doesn't mean anything. You can have a very weakened level, which is what you mean by differential calculus. You cannot reach absolute zero. You can only differential, only move to zero. So sensation, when you transpose, can have only a weakened form. And there is nothing called a tabula rasa or something on which, how Kant defines sensation. It's an active synthesis. No, it doesn't happen like that. So this is the problem. Different departments. How does it connect? Why don't we take it out and take it as one continuum? So sensation is one form of understanding. For understanding, maybe reason, maybe another form of continuum. It's only differentials. And that's why differential, and that is where Deleuze makes it much more differential. So he takes Leibniz in a major way.
Yeah, I think, thanks for this wonderful speech. When I thought of this, you mentioned Duns Scotus, the Duns Scotus. I think this is the only doctrine in the medieval scholastics where you don't find God. It is the intuitive cognition, the cognitio intuitiva, which presupposes the presence of an object. But then there is cognitio abstractiva with abstraction, where you don't need the presence of the object. But then philosophy has a clear strategy, when we move from the medieval time to the modern time, to negate this presence. It's a series of negations, as practiced from Descartes till Kant, the method of negation. And what is negated? The object of the senses, and the real object. And you rightly point out this differential calculus. It's developed by Leibniz and Newton. You can trace it back to Cusanus in the medieval scholastics. And this delta x tending only to zero, but it is equated to zero. And there is this wonderful work by Hermann Cohen, that is the principle of differential calculus and its history, and drawing an analogy between this delta x and intensive reality based on the anticipation de Wahrnehmung, the anticipation of perception. And the tension is very clear. It is eternally present, this problem of infinitesimal, originally proposed by Aristotle, which was a potential infinitesimal, and it became actual in the 19th century. And then Nietzsche reversed it. And I also think this is directional. The whole, as you said, this hierarchy, of which is like the power established always through negation. Yeah, and first it was the good, the idea, and then through Plotin and Augustinus and the medieval scholastics, the God, and the God replaced by the human subject, and the series of essays concerning human understanding, and in the end God vanished from the philosophy.
Question.
I have a few clarifications.
We're talking about this, right? So the point is, how to explain, these more about the conditions of real experience rather than the conditions of possible experience. Possibly that's what Deleuze is talking about. So my question is, why do we find the philosopher appropriating, like my friend over here said, so much vocabulary from across the sciences, across mathematics, so always this thing about, dealing with problems, always this thing about conceptualization, not creating concepts. So for example, the thing that he quoted from Varghese K, so even there, he talks about the Cartesian cogito, like you pointed out, and after that you add certain things to it. So Kant adds certain things to it, it becomes a new concept altogether. So the point is, why is he, can you just please throw some light on, why is he really moving across disciplines for that matter? So is he trying to, sort of philosophize about, on one hand, art. Like he talks about Francis Bacon at one point. He talks about Bergson, of course, those are his influences. But why does he keep coming back to real life and trying to philosophize, trying to draw concepts from there? I mean, how does it set apart Deleuze from other philosophers? His intent that, sort of coming back to real life, coming back to real experience, how does it set him apart from the rest of the, let's say, rest of the philosophers we are possibly more familiar with?
One part of the question I couldn't understand. Why he's coming back to real life?
In the sense that, let's say if there's a Deleuzean project, how is the Deleuzean project, for example, different from a typical, or like we said, that philosophy beyond philosophy, etc. Now the point is, how would I, sort of characterize a Deleuzean project? As in, I understand intensity, I understand difference, but the point is, Deleuze is also trying to really talk about a lot of different things. So he's trying to talk about cinema, he's trying to talk about art, he's trying to talk about mathematics. Now, all of this, but with the caveat that he's not really a mathematician, he's not a scientist, he's extracting concepts from different areas of life. So the point is, how should we characterize the Deleuzean project as opposed to, let's say, a Heideggerian project or, some other project? So what is it that drives Deleuze to move into so many areas and possibly talk about it?
Yeah. As I said, the problem is that Deleuze, somebody like who examines as a philosophical project, especially what is difference itself. I mean, there is nothing that escapes his notice. And the basic transformation, the basic idea of Deleuze is that, simply put, that he thinks essence is not space but time. Very Bergsonian, that ultimately everything changes within the matrix of time. And if everything changes, I mean, again the Bergsonian problem, is this change or the multiple structures of change in various domains, like how they interact or how they interconnect or change within itself, like how we can. That is where he's very much, that is why the unified subject, such concepts just vanished. But something like what he tried to formulate is heterocracy, looking at myself what are processes are happening at the same time in me. My hair may be falling down, my teeth may be getting weakened, maybe something inside something else will be going on. So I become a complex structure of heterocracy. Same time, I may be hearing a music outside while listening to you. So these are all not only differentiating within myself. This is at the same point when he's establishing different sources of relations and different sorts of problems. And again, this major problem, again, once different, once it is posited with time, the second question, how do you visualize change? Change is something, for him something happens in time. And this doesn't have a very rational logic. And that is where he came with a very powerful concept called virtual. And it's a very important thing. It's very simple. That there are certain fixed structures in which you can never understand what it can differentiate to. For example, a very famous example which he gives, the trunk of an elephant. You know that at no point you can say very clearly that how many marks will be on that trunk, how many furrows will be on the trunk, because that is a virtual actualization, a variation. But also within that limit, you can also safely predict that trunk will not become a tail, or it will not become an ear. So these is the two limits in which, this is what he calls the difference, the virtual difference. Second, what he also calls something called asymmetric synthesis. I mean, intensity and synthesis. How do you know that from an egg inside which there is only pulp? how it turns to become a fluffy, so a beautiful chicken. What sorts of things happen? I mean, what sorts of intensive movements happens within an egg, which completely create a completely no relation between a pulpy yolk and a chicken that is hatching out. This is something asymmetric. What is asymmetric? So their fields cause effect, or what we call that. I mean, that's why he was very much into the cause effect relation, or like anteriority, like I mean, something like what happens later, posteriority. All these relations are completely like completely broken. So, and also as he argues that this intensive for something like a tortoise to hatch, the kind of movement that is happening within the tortoise egg, the seemingly resolved egg, can even break huge ligaments like that much power, that much intensity is compressed in the hatching of an egg. What is happening in the egg is all movement, from one point to the other, like this gets disintegrated, there's a lot of movement, suddenly something comes out. So this was where his problem was. Is this not a philosophical problem too? How will scientists explain it? But philosophers also can have something to understand there. Another famous example, the wasp and the orchid. See, there is a flower and there is an orchid. Only if a wasp comes and takes the pollen and put it in another flower, then only it can reproduce. So which is the real sexual partner? Is it another flower or the wasp? So the wasp and orchid is what we call rhizomatic relation, to put it very simply, or very simplicity. So in nature, this kind of unkind asymmetric relation, asymmetric synthesis, this is going on. And these all works differential. We have to go into that, what we call intensive spatial and all that, which I do not take it up right now because there's a lot to. That's why sometimes I may put in suspense. So please try to come to Manipal and we'll have a colloquium there right now. So that is something which we share to like. So this is where, unlike relations, asymmetric kind of things like which never can be related, all this now. And cause effect, this is something which he was very worried about. So he used to use stoic kind of logic many times. If I say something like a cylinder that spins, I just pocket just an initial cause. But after that it will go on spinning. You don't need a second cause to go spinning. So there is something called a cause of a cause. Can you say that? So it's not a cause effect. But if the spinning goes self-causing, spinning in that sense, there is some cause, which is already working there which spins that. And my cause is only one cause. And that cause is a cause of a cause. And there is something which Deleuze uses So we cannot have this cause effect, all this kind of logic within the Deleuzian system. And this kind of asymmetry, when the chicken comes out of it if there is an asymmetric scene, something new happens, or something which you can now expect, does it have something philosophically also to look at? That's all. That's all we try to do it. So these kind of things he looked into nature and tried to come out with. So he says that philosophy is everywhere. Philosophy can be everywhere. Yes.
So I had a question because I'm trying to also relate the period in which Deleuze is writing. So when you think in terms of this problem with causality, which you just mentioned, which is around a bit of how would you relate developments in science, which eventually right after the period that he was writing, would predict the beginning of the universe, right, and the beginning of time in itself. And the period when Deleuze was writing, the ascendancy in, at that time, cosmology would be that of Fred Hoyle and company, which was looking at this sort of a steady state. And that's where elements would be working. So how far would you think that Deleuze's philosophy is in itself a product of the material and the academic materiality of his own things? So that's it.
How far? Sorry.
I'm asking whether his own ideas, Deleuze's ideas regarding evidence and this entire problem we're trying to locate causality, right? We're trying cause. Would it also be a product of the prevalent, dominant scientific, thinking regarding cosmology at that time, which would be represented by Fred Hoyle and all, would we're talking about the steady state theory, right? And how would you view it in retrospect today when we no longer view it in that sense? We have a very clear-cut sign, and also we have experiments which show that that the universe would have had a prime beginning. So both space and time would have a beginning, right? With Hawking radiation and the Big Bang coming into effect. So how would you place Deleuze in this post Big Bang context? There definitely is a beginning. So how would this theories at all work?
No, Deleuze definitely was not a scientist in that sense.
Also because he uses that language. So
yeah, he had uses a lot of scientific ideas, or looked at science also from a philosophical basis, especially a lot to do with space and time. All these things, like he has used a lot of ideas from science, especially Riemannian geometry, like a lot of differential calculus, all these things he has used. But as such, he is not a philosopher. Not a scientist to look at. But of course, his position is very clear, especially in what is philosophy. He says that ultimately it is chaos. There is a chaos in which philosophy, science, and art lays three definite sorts of, three planes. So the chaos itself can be seen through a philosophy plane. The same thing can be seen through a science plane and also an art plane. These realities are not different. These are only three planes through which we try to appropriate. So science function is, science, he argues, I don't know if I'll also agree with him, says that it slows down. It slows down reality, or try to domesticate it to certain functions, written in certain functions. So a scientist's function is always to understand, or theory means to write it down, to slow down, to contain it in certain definite equations, and that is what he says. He argues. Philosopher definitely, as we say, that just servo, it is an intensity. It is something like an infinite sort of survey. At infinite speed. That is something which he thinks about. With philosophy. Art again is something like what you extract, not perception, but a sort of percept. It's another concept he uses in relation to art. So these are only three ways of understanding, three planes that is laid on the chaos as such. So these three ways of appropriating. So it is only from that perspective that much Deleuze can go up to. But he uses many concepts he was influenced by a lot of mathematicians like Albert Lotman, Riemann, Weismann on Darwinism, neo-Darwinians. A lot of concepts is Carnot, then Curie, on physicists, dynamics, thermodynamics. He used all those paradigms actually to understand, to extract a sort of philosophic quintessence out of that. So that is why it is a more complicated system. So it is somebody who is very comfortable moving from one point to the other, but has to come out with something of a very clear sort of thing. So space for space itself is more. Better I would advise you to go through the book. The best book possible on him should be Manuel Delanda, very clearly written a book called Intensive Science and Virtual Philosophy. Which has given very clearly a Deleuzean point of view of science, and from that he has taken it very clearly. Somewhat it's mechanical, but a lot of things are there actually. Deleuze's problem was he never believed in identity. That's why he started constructing series and relations. For example, if Aristotle, you do not have a very clear position of Aristotle the man. Aristotle the physical man may be there. Then you can define it in many ways. Aristotle the statuette. Aristotle, the teacher of Alexander, Aristotle, the other Aristotle. So something like series, and that series proliferate. So the subjectivity is something which he never To use such kind of series, or a proliferation of series and interconnecting series, he might use that kind of topology. The topology is another area which he used there is something there is no identity, even in space no identity, because topology, a lot of things can be inside one body or one structure like that. So he's always concerned about series, topological layers, what we call, he will put it philosophically, like intensive spatial, like so many relations like that. Like, there's nothing called a very definite identity. He's never happy with that. So even a subject, myself can be put in a different series. Like, a George who was here once, like in JNU, might have a different George, later somewhere else. Like, this all becomes me. So I'm just in a series, and those series correlate. And at that time, my relation was somebody else. So there is no, and I'm also becoming. Next moment, I may die. But that may be, of course, like with Heidegger also maybe a major category, but of course there is a very existentialized sort of this thing, but not the awkwardness, not the complex time structure which Deleuze handled. That's why. So that is why. There is nothing called existential Dasein or subject or possibility or death, no category like that. I am only a series. In death also I may be one point of a series. After my death, like I may be resurrected, I may be canonized, I may be saint. I never die. Who said that I died? No. So that's where the whole problem. So we are all on a series, like interconnection, series. So causality, that is why very important sort of connections like that. This is Frege actually. I mean Frege's paradox. It was very much with Frege. And he used to take on all this kind of like Carroll's paradox, as we said, that Alice is growing at the same time bigger and smaller. Another problem. Maybe. With the previous self, she's growing bigger, but what she will become, she's only smaller. So, in that sense, it's an event. It's an anxiety. That's where. So, subjectivity is something which he never accepted, at least in the Kantian Cartesian form. So that is where all is symmetry and series, and space itself, but he has all what we call, Deleuze definitely explains it, what we call phase space, what is space, and he starts his book like that, like a bicycle. How complex the space is, it's pedal and all that, and then suddenly I get into it. I have something like an intensity, something like I'm also driven by something. I want to pedal like that. How many complicated kind of displacement that a particular bicycle makes. And that is where Deleuze clearly starts with that, what he call phase space. There cannot be a definite space, there can be only phase space. I myself see how much I am moving my space is moving. So it's only an intensive dynamic space and even something is at rest, there is a lot of dynamism going inside. An unsuspecting egg, just like there, what all is happening? You give the right temperature, what all will happen in that? And finally, before the chicken comes out, a lot of movements. That is why he calls there is an intensive spatial. The space is intensive. Let us go to intensive. And space itself is intensive. There's what we call a difference in repetition. Space is also not the same. It is not length and breadth. You go and look at the well. What do you see? What is a vertigo? What do you see inside? Do you see a well in terms of length and breadth? Okay, this well is 50 feet. No. It is an intensive space. You look at it. You will just shut up. You will get back. No, that's not a space like that. So space itself is very complex. It is not a neutral, metricized space. There is no metric space for him. It is only intensive space or topological space in another sense. You take a space like sponge. What is a sponge? You just press it what will happen? You release it, it will make a square. But you do not know how many things, how much intensive displacements occur in that sponge. Riemann, of course, he took it from Riemannian space. How much? Can you see, when you squeeze it, what kind of space this is? If you look at it very clearly, it has a very clear length, breadth, everything. But it's an intensive space. You put some energy on that, the space will get distorted, displaced. Take a sphere. You can, a sphere like this, can you put it into length and breadth? No, it is a space in itself. And how many things can be contained topologically in a sphere? You can put so many things in so many shapes inside a thing. That means it contains potentially all these spaces. So it is really, symmetry has to be broken. Systematically, that sphere, that cloud will take it to deform into so many things. Deforming space. Riemann was, this is from where Einstein took it. Einstein's great theory. Space is only intensive. Space is only what it becomes, not an empty container into which you put it. So that is why. And with Einstein, it became the most important discovery. Time is also added to it, the fourth dimension. If there is a space, the fourth dimension, space only at that time, only one, the moment I put the time, then only it says that what it is at that particular time. Next moment it can be something else, difference. So, without the fourth factor, time, put it into the three dimensions, space can never be fixed. Space at a particular time. So, fourth dimension becomes very important. And that is why Einstein made a breakthrough. And space is something only intensive. Only when this is there, that space is. Not the Kantian, like now, the form of the interior, form of the exterior form of sensation or something already there, not the extension. So this was something like the Brock with Rayman. I'm not at all good, sorry, like I know very little patchy things, like I'm not at all good physics. Whatever I learned is very basic thing which Deleuze wrote, try to understand. I may be wrong, but this is the way he tries to see space, time, subjectivity, series, like all this. It tries to like the connections. Who has kind of rocket, like what kind of relation it. And again, something like he will say very affective things which will speak about Spinoza. He says, he clearly says that a race car and a race horse are equivalent, rather than a plow ox, or a plow ox and a plow horse will be the same. Not a plow horse and a race horse, they may be an animal, same species, but effectively, according to the speed, according to the effect, a race horse is something equal to a race car. The price is also almost same. A Rolls Royce car and a resource costs almost the same money. A plow ox and a plow horse may have the same species but different effects. So go by very Spinoza, go by different effects. So a thing's essence is not its species or its genus, but its effects. We can. Yeah. So that's why a good racehorse may be costing as much money as a good race car. Yeah, that's the price. A plow also is a very sluggish thing. It's another thing. So in that way, the criterion becomes very different. So in Deleuzean world or Spinoza's world, things differentiates. Identity is not genus, species, individuation. It's another criteria. It's difference, intensity, like that. Look at the well, you'll see that space is very intense. You can't go to the top and look down the building. Maybe length, but that's not a length. That's something else. I'll shut up, I'll get back. So in that sense, the whole world has got what we call a differential intensity, or there is only intensive space. That's what he argues, definitely.
Maybe a kind of clarification, because you began by talking about planes of immanence and the relationship between a plane of immanence or an image of thought and concept. And also when you discussed this idea of philosophy as creation of concept, etc. Now both of these things have concerned me, and I've been wondering, a lot of people write about Deleuze, and Deleuze himself, when he speaks about the relationship between image of thought and concept, there is a sense in which concept seems to they can't really think the plane of image of thought in a conceptual language. That's not possible, but they seem to open up to the image of thought which precedes concept in some sense. Now, when the relationship between concept and image of thought is thought of in this manner, then I'm wondering what the idea of philosophy as construction actually means. Like in somebody like Badiou, there's a very clear indication that this is not philosophy, this is philosophy for the event. So in some sense, although the concept is formed by the event, but it is geared towards an event in the future. So there is a clear constructionist, a kind of creationist, not creationist, but one can see where how it is, there's some notion of creation of the event, comporting towards the event involved. But in Deleuze, leaving aside the idea of lines of light, etc., and anti-Oedipus, whenever I think of image of thought and its relationship with concept, it seems to look back. The concept seems to look back towards the image of thought. That's something I have really been able to think through.
Yeah, with Deleuze, concept doesn't mean it's not a totalization. Only concept will lead to new concepts, otherwise philosophy will become dead. So, maybe more fundamental is that for Deleuze, whole reality is just posited as a problem. It is only a problem. Or again, as Jan says, don't try to give answers, but try to pose your problems very correctly. And those problems and a concept only leads to another problem, which you see in Descartes, like from the subjective things, like another problem is raised, what is God? And from God, like it moves to extension. So like that, and no concept is isolated, or no component of a concept is isolated or in itself. Everything is a problem. So if Deleuze will say, our eye is the problem solving of a problem of light. So light has something and human eye is a problem. It's a problem. And a problem only creates new problems. So like my room, like when I came, like there are a lot of plastic bottled water like in my room. Maybe it may be solving my problem, but it creates other problems, like more plastic bottles. There's another problem. You might say that, okay, why don't I go and use my hand to drink water? But that has been culturally another problem which has been already solved. So we do not like go and like drink water with hands. Like now it's another problem. Or say electricity. 19th century we found electricity, but what does it lead to? Other problems, like so much coal being unearthed and so much damages, like ecological damages. That's what happening. So for him, there's nothing called a finality. It is only differentials, new problems. Plastic will create new problems. Like that. Concept doesn't have any finality. It will open up. From there, like from Cartesian cogito, it moved to Kant. And a new problem was raised. And especially one component was absent in Descartes, and that was time. And time as a component was added to the Cartesian problem. Time was there, of course. Aristotle and time was very different. Very cosmological. But Descartes raised a big problem, but only with Kant, the time became an interior form of intuition. A new component was added to that concept. And that might take a new turn with existentialism. You can if you just like examine it closely, you see that new components getting added. So it's a concepts will go on creating new concepts, but that doesn't mean it is just linear. It can come from somewhere else. Like rhizome, very important concept. Like tree were being always the model. Suddenly he says that no, it is all about rhizomes, like no, tubers, like no. It's not a hierarchy like a tree model, like no. Reality connects not like hierarchically like a tree from trunk to the roots to the leaf, not like that. That model let us bear with. Let us see a rhizome, different nodes, like no, and different nodes. I have one node here, like one node connected to maybe my students in MCPH, one node connected to my friend here, one node in my family. So like a lot of connections can be. So it's not a hierarchic model. Like see these rhizome became a very powerful model. War machine, another very important concept he got. Territorialization, very brilliant concept. See what says it very simply. Territorialize everything is a territorialization. Is it very famous example? You deterritorialize it to another thing, it becomes something else. Say like a bamboo. You territorialize it, it's in the plant world. Today you break it and put it in another world. It is deterritorialized, it becomes something else. It may be done by with a policeman, like how you can meet. It's simply deterritorialized. Yeah, a plant, innocent looking plant, like in a plant world, very territorialized. You break it and put it another this thing. Can be very destructive, beating me up like no, sometimes. So there can be for every deterritorialization there is a reterritorialization also. Something time twisting. So these are very simple concepts, but these were quite powerful enough. There is nothing called a dead concept or nothing like that. It will go on creating new problems. It proliferate new problems. Cartesian cogito critically created a problem. The answer was the Kantian subject. That added some other components and it became something new. When the time was added, it became something new. So that's what he says. No, there is no finality, only problems. And this is not the answer which is important, but how you correctly pose a problem. How you correctly, clearly put a problem. That is more important than an answer. Because no problem will end. Today, bottled water, plastic, tomorrow another problem will come up. We'll try to do it, another problem will come up, definitely. So it won't go on. Philosophy is also like that.
We'll have a very short question from Anu and a very short answer from.
Bobby, since you are here, I'm just sharing a few doubts that I've had. These are not questions to you so much, just your reflections on it, and it has to be short now. One is, how would we understand the Deleuzian conception of time? Would it be a kind of extreme presentism, or would it be a possibilism, kind of where past and future are the trunk, but the future is past and present are the trunk, and the future is open in a certain way? I ask this because the two poles of the difference question come to me like this. One is, how would we not become indifferent to difference is one problem. The other is, and I don't want to go back to older theories of repetition, what would be a post-Deleuzian understanding of repetition, given that difference has been rendered, I can't say central, but as a fundamental problematic. So, would there be a theory of repetition?
This is a very, very vast question, right? What should I say? This notion of time. Basically, Deleuze handles the notion of time in relation to three more philosophers. One is Hume definitely of the present. Then on past is Bergson, but he is not very happy. But on future, if we differentiate it very mechanically, like that. So I think what became important more than what we call the present or past or the Bergsonian or Humean. What became more important was definitely is Nietzschean state. And again, look, he still thinks that it is the repetition that is finally, but repetition of the different. It's not repetition the same. I mean, repetition of the different that is to be, and it is that asymmetry of that something in the core which make things move. So in that sense, like the any revolution, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, you will have might be there is something repeated, but there is something also very new, very different. So becoming that is what he is trying to explain. But the more important perhaps of the reading is made by, I think, value that in the larger project, this is difference that is being repeated into. In the larger project, if Deleuze says that it is the same that is, it is not the different, actually the same that repeated, there is a point. And he substantiates, value reads it like that. Like, for example, if we take and toss the coins, toss a coin, head or tail, for 10 toss you may find a 5 coin, 5 head, 5 tails, or 100 also, maybe different. Maybe 10 maybe only 2 maybe tail and 8 maybe head, or 100 also maybe 80. But if you do it 100,000 times, he says that it will be almost equal, 50,000 and 50,000 roughly, so as we increase. So that is why in the longer project, what we call difference will be the same. That is brilliant on that. And that's his reading of, is one of his very good reading of, this repetition. The repetition difference, at the final, the extreme point, it is a non-difference, it is almost the same. Yeah. And so that is where it is ambiguity. And I think there is a big logic, a great logic in values reading. We ourselves can try. I thought it started trying it let us toss it So So the different itself in the long term is the same. And that is where Deleuze was very clear. I mean, what we call transductional. Not only the next dice, the rule of the next die also should change. I mean, that is where it's a change with change. If I'm doing the same dice play and same terms of my dice play, that may be the same. So, but change the terms of the next dice play also. I mean, very simultaneous. I mean, what we call transduction, development with change. I mean, the terms also should change with the change. And once that happens, it is completed. So we have reached somewhere in between. So I do not have a final answer.
No. I just wanted to.
I'm very, but I'm just intrigued by both sorts of possibilities. So but you will argue in long term, all repetition will be the same.
Yeah.
But Deleuze will argue change the term also. If the dice is 6-sided, make it 8, like now, and then it will change. So one final throw. I mean, that throw itself it should be a change. And I mean, that is where like so it's slightly a complicated thing. I don't have a final answer. I don't know.
Well, I have been, all throughout your presentation, I have been trying to imagine a bearded Hegel and a clean-shaved Marx and a women Nietzsche. So thank you very much for the presentation, and we will have you soon once again. Many times, many more times.